Okay. Oops, started at the end. Hi, as people come on, we're showing some video from a trip that one of our speakers organized, and I'm going to try it now again with another piece of her video.
Okay, this is the group from Sacred Heart Church. We're here in the Church of Sacred Heart in Cuba and Havana. And then this is the toy distribution that we came. We came bearing gifts. So that's the thing, we came bearing gifts. So we gave a lot of gifts. You're looking at Father Zayas, who is the pastor of the church. And Father Hilaire, how do you feel today is celebrating Mass and then being part of the celebration of toys of gift?
I feel right at home. That gives us a sense of the universality of the church. It doesn't matter where you are. We are one church, one faith, and it is so good to experience the faith of the Cuban people and to experience their love, to experience their faith. And Father Zayas was very really wistful to welcome us here to celebrate with the people of Sacred Heart. And it's just happened that we are from Sacred Heart in New York, so it's like we are two sister churches. It was just such a joy to be here. We feel right at home to celebrate with them, to share love. In fact, the message today was just about love. God asks us to love one another. We are all His children, and I think that brings it to life. You know, this mandate from God to live in His love. And that becomes concrete here by our presence here in Cuba. So I cannot be more thankful to God for that opportunity to be here and to share God's love with them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Father Hilaire. Jocelyn, comment vas-tu aujourd'hui?
Okay, good. Well, we are up to, I guess, 88 people of the 140 or some registrants. So I think we are certainly ready to go. We don't want to punish the people who are on time, for people who come later. And this will all be available online probably by tomorrow. So welcome. This is a program organized by the Fund for Reconciliation and Development, our Cuba-US People-to-People partnership. We're hoping to take a look at the state of play right now on especially travel as a result of the announcements last week by the US government on and from OFAC in particular of new regulations. You'll hear from Bill LeoGrande first, talking about something of the political context, the Summit of the Americas, and how that fit into what happened. And then Bob Muse will give us a good chunk of where the legal situation is, exactly what these new regulations mean. And then we will have people, Tom Popper, who was one of the real pioneers of organizing group trips to Cuba, will speak. And then we'll have direct experiences of people who have organized trips for Americans in the post-COVID era. So Bill, if you look on the basic blog page, you'll see bios of everybody, so I won't go into detail, but Bill is a professor at American University and one of the best known of the experts on US-Cuba relations. Bill. We're not hearing you. You're mute. There you're muted.
You'd think after 2 years that we'd have this down. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us today. I want to talk a little bit about the politics behind the measures that the administration has taken, relaxing some of the sanctions. As I'm sure most of you know, the administration said right after coming to office that it was reviewing Cuba policy, and that policy review went on for 16 months without any result until all of a sudden, just a couple of weeks ago now, they announced a series of measures around remittances and academic travel and people-to-people travel primarily. I think there were two things that contributed to this. One is the ongoing migration crisis that the administration is facing on the southern US border. Cubans are among the top 2 or 3 countries of origin of the migrants who are at the border and claiming political asylum. So far in this fiscal year, which started last September, 134,000 Cubans have presented themselves, almost all of them at the southern border, a few crossing the Florida Strait to Florida, but about 90% of them, or more than 90%, at the southern border, obviously contributing to that enormous humanitarian problem, but also enormous political headache for the Biden administration. So by finally restoring a channel for remittances and reopening the consular section of the US Embassy so that Cubans can get immigrant visas and come to the United States in a safe, organized, legal way, the administration is trying to take some of the pressure off the southern border. The other reason was the run-up to the Summit of the Americas, because they were facing, as I'm sure all of you know, a lot of resistance from a number of Latin American countries about the decision to not invite Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And ultimately, Mexican President AMLO decided he would skip the summit entirely and send his foreign minister. And a number of other countries, 3 or 4 or 5 other countries, did the same. The head of state decided not to come. So the summit really got off to a difficult start. The hope was, on the part of the administration, that by taking these measures right on the eve of the summit, they might blunt the political problems that they were having with a number of the other Latin American countries. This really was reminiscent for me of the 2012 Cartagena summit, when Obama was really embarrassed by a parade of Latin American heads of state speaking about the need to include Cuba in the summit process. And we saw a little bit of that this time as well. So regardless of the reasons for these measures, I think that they're potentially important ones. but we've so far only really got sort of an outline of them, and I'll let the other speakers talk about the details. We haven't really seen the necessary implementation measures yet on a lot of these things. And so how much actual impact they'll have is still a little bit up for grabs. Let me talk a little bit in more detail about the summit. As the summit deadline approached, the administration was still waiting in terms of sending out invitations. No invitations went out until the middle of May. And there were some invitations still had not been sent out at the beginning of June, which is to say a week before the summit was scheduled to start. That's obviously unprecedented. The reason, of course, was that the administration was trying to find some kind of compromise to solve this problem over Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, but especially Cuba. So in discussions with Mexico, one of the things the administration proposed was that the Cubans might be invited as an observer, or they might be invited to participate with lower level officials, not President Miguel Diaz-Canel. Well, as you can imagine, the Cubans rejected this idea of second-class citizenship preemptively, and the administration was simply not willing to give in and allow the Cubans to participate. There were other problems with this summit as well, and the agenda wasn't set until very late either. And in fact, the agenda wasn't really very clear. It didn't seem like there was a lot of advanced planning on this prior to previous summits. It seems like the only substantive measure that there was a broad consensus on was the issue of migration. And at the end of the summit, they issued a fairly detailed plan about what various participating countries would do to try to begin to solve the problem of illegal migration. It seems to me that the problem here, I should add before I move off of immigration, the countries that are sending the most migrants to the United States were all countries that did not have their head of state at the summit: Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Venezuela, Cuba, and Mexico. Together, they comprise 69% of the arrivals on the southern border in April. So yes, they came up with a migration agreement, but again, we'll have to wait and see whether or not they've got agreement from the principal sending countries, because if they don't, it's not going to make much difference. On almost all the other issues, economic development, climate change, trade, investment, they issued general statements of cooperation, but all very short on specifics. And so on the one hand, while the summit wasn't a diplomatic disaster, I think we have to say it wasn't much of a success either. And it really demonstrates that the United States really doesn't have the capacity any longer to sort of call the political tune in Latin America and get other Latin American countries to just fall into line. And with that, I'll turn it back to John.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm sure everybody has questions and we'll come back to them later. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function. The chat is current, you can chat to the speakers, but you can't chat generally. I will, when we get to the discussion point, I'll open up the chat so everybody can talk among themselves. But at this point, so this focuses on what the speakers are saying, we'll keep the chat just that one-way system. So our next speaker, as I said, is Bob Muse, who has been the source of wisdom legally for many of us for many years, and is highly regarded in the Washington business community and in the political community for his knowledge and also for his advocacy. Bob.
Thank you. Can you hear me, John?
Yes, just fine.
Okay. I want to focus on the travel regs that came out on June 9th. we're waiting on other things. Internet access, there are many things that have not been addressed. I agree with Bill LeoGrande that the announcement of policy changes on Cuba, limited as they were very much a hurry up affair to get something out there. And the easiest thing to do was reprise pre-existing regulations. They're on the shelf, they're ready-made. And harder is, and remaining difficult, are modalities of remittances and things, again, like enhanced internet access. But purely on the subject of travel, as all of you know, Barack Obama reinstituted people-to-people travel, originally conceived by the Clinton administration late in Clinton's second term. And he moved along quite rapidly with it once he got started. In the end, he had authorized individual people-to-people travel and without generally licensed independent travel to Cuba, which is effectively deregulating the embargo on travel to Cuba. If you felt you qualified and it wasn't hard, you simply went, followed your own itinerary. Trump, 5 years ago, longer, in January 2017, announced a new policy toward Cuba. And that policy had as one of its central elements, depriving the military of revenue. And this was going to become a leitmotif with the Trump administration for the following nearly 4 years. Among other things, he eliminated people-to-people travel entirely. I'll come back to this in a moment because I think it's important. Also, that went with it were the provision allowing for public performances, exhibitions, and workshops and clinics in Cuba. That has, to me, enormous First Amendment freedom of expression elements that I want to come back to. Anyway, when they announced on June 9th the resurrection of people-to-people travel, they reprised the Obama reg word by word. It doesn't include individual travel, but all the required elements, a full schedule of educational activities. Some of its more normative aspects are, it has to take place under the auspices of a person subject to U.S. jurisdiction, but that means an organization, somebody who organizes the group and is ultimately responsible for compliance of the people who've traveled under the group. So it's got to be full-time scheduled activities that support civil society or promote the independence of Cubans from Cuban authorities. And it also requires meaningful interaction between the traveler and individuals in Cuba. Those of you who followed the Title III Helms-Burton lawsuits in Miami, principally against the cruise ship owners, will know that there's great danger lies in this. That was not ever in the contemplation of the cruise ships that they would be put to strict proof one day that they were engaged in full-time educational activity and that there was meaningful interaction with the Cuban people. When they offloaded 3,000 passengers in Old Havana from a cruise ship and then reboarded them 3 hours later, it was impossible for them to meet those conditions. Parenthetically, the Biden administration leaves Title III in full operation. So apart from individual people-to-people travel, there are two further critical distinctions between Obama-era travel, Trump-era travel, and what we now have with Biden. First of all, the restricted entities list continues to exist. That's an element of potential liability for violating the embargo by entering into direct transactions with Cuban state entities on the list. It includes companies like Gaviota that are active in the tourist sector. It includes some financial institutions, and it extends to things like stores in Old Havana. So one element of compliance that all travel service providers are going to have to look at is their interactions, if any, with entities on the restricted list. On that list are hotels, oddly enough, but it's not a comprehensive list. You won't find the Nacional, you won't find the Parque Central, but you will find them on a second list, again, created by the Trump administration and fully in place. And that's the prohibited accommodation list that is enforced by the State Department. Virtually every hotel of any consequence in Cuba is on that list, and for a good reason, to limit the amount of possible travel to Cuba. It's a small comfort, but the limitation extends no further than accommodation, sleeping in the hotel. So you could use the hotel for conference rooms and other facilities. But it's a huge problem for the industry. The people-to-people trips I remember being involved in compliance for National Geographic and others were often 25 to 30 travelers in a group. Without access to hotel accommodation, that's going to severely limit the number and size of the travel delegations to be expected going to Cuba. There's nothing in the Cuba private sector that can meet that need. Also, travelers, I run against this periodically. I'd be interested in people, pros in the industry. A lot of people want the security a hotel offers, doormen, things like that. So they're just not comfortable with staying in a casa particular, no matter how many assurances you give them about the safety of Cuba. So the fact that the Biden administration has left in place the restricted entities, the prohibited accommodation list, is going to greatly limit the announcement that people-to-people travel has been restored. Just as a parenthetical comment, I would think that individual people-to-people travel would be more supportive of the aims of support for Cuban entrepreneurs that is often talked about. Individual travel would put a great deal more US citizens into Cuba and therefore in contact with that emerging private sector, hotels, bars, musicians, fine artists, taxis, and so on. So I've never had that explained to me why he retained the group requirement other than it was just a way of restricting the travel. I want to return to and wind up with First Amendment issues that some months ago, Meryl Streep and 300 other people signed on behalf of Human Rights Watch a group letter saying that the Cuban government should be respectful of First Amendment freedom of speech. This followed some arrests of musicians and others. I don't know that Meryl Streep knew that, and it exists right now, is she cannot go to Cuba and give a public performance. She needs a specific paper license from OFAC to do that. The same is true of an artist exhibiting in Cuba, a musician performing in Cuba. That remains extant. So just picture a process where Meryl Streep files an application. An official of OFAC has to review that application. For what? Her bona fides as an actor or the content of her performance? Is she more likely to get a license if she's going to read the Lady Macbeth soliloquy in Havana or read from Che Guevara's last entries in his Bolivian diary? So we're now into what's called prior restraint content analysis, which is completely anathema to US First Amendment values of freedom of expression. What may be expected in the future? Those of you that watched the confirmation hearings of Tony Blinken may recall with what relish he embraced the idea as presented by Marco Rubio that hotels, restaurants, wouldn't it be better if people traveling to Cuba had to use the services of Cuban entrepreneurs rather than have the revenue go to the military? Lincoln avidly adopted that and said, yes, absolutely agree with you. He later gave representations that he would do nothing without consultation with Congress before he makes any move at all. Ned Price at State Department said, picture Congress as being the co-pilot on this plane of Cuba policy. We are not going to do anything without consultation and coordination with Congress. So I think that remains a major issue, is Tony Blinken's desire to avoid a radioactive blast from Menendez, Rubio, et cetera. I think, so we see a very small action taken by the Biden administration, and with all appearances of reluctant necessity, as Bill LeoGrande pointed out. So I'll end there. I wish I could be more hopeful, but one final comment is I think we've got some good people in State Department and elsewhere, veterans of the Obama normalization push. They know how to write regs. They know how to advance policies. We're lacking any support at the top. And I would say we're lacking it too at the upper middle, including the National Security Advisor, Juan Gonzalez, has not distinguished himself in this episode. Also, the Assistant Secretary for Latin America. I can find very little evidence of any footprints of Mr. Nichols on anything to do with Latin America. So I think we've got a rather poorly motivated upper middle level. We have an absent upper level of policy makers and people who push through a policy regarding Cuba. And then we're looking at, in there and interested in what people have to say. Thank you, John.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. We'll come back into those topics in the discussion. And if the statements that were made were largely for optical purposes for the Summit of the Americas, the question is now whether what motivates them to go and actually make these things function in a real way. We'll see. Tom Popper is, as I said before, somebody who really showed that it was possible to do mass tourism to Cuba that went beyond the kind of old lefty solidarity, friendship parameters and brought in a lot of different kinds of Americans for their first experience of the country. Tom.
Thanks, John. Great seeing everybody. When it comes to Cuba travel, Cuba policy, Cuba regulations, there's so much information. If you're in the travel industry, it can be daunting to comprehend what happened, what's going on, what does it mean for me, what does it mean for travelers, for my business, how do I proceed, what do I do? So I'm going to hopefully distill some of what we heard and kind of make it simple and give you everybody an idea of what's the best path forward, if now's the time to go forward and what you need to do. Effectively, and like Robert and William had intimated, there was some regulation changes. To a certain degree, they were window dressing. The good news is travel to Cuba remains legal for Americans. It was legal under the Trump administration, and it's still legal under the Biden administration, although it's still fairly limited. There's essentially two license categories, one called Support for the Cuban People, which is still active, and then President Biden effectively reinstated the Support for the Cuban People people-to-people travel. There's really never been a time when both licenses ran concurrently, because as they are in their current form, they're very similar. So what I would recommend to anybody interested in sending passengers to Cuba or getting involved with travel to Cuba is just simply work with a tour operator that has experience in sending Americans to Cuba. A lot of the people on this call that you're listening to have supported a lot of these companies for decades and have given them a lot of this information and been able to distill them to make the best business decisions. So which license your passengers travel with, if you work with a tour operator, they will kind of make sure that your guests are compliant, whichever license they're traveling under, that the activities are rewarding and interactive and meaningful, and that your guests will have a great experience. That's the first step. That being said, and that travel remains and has remained legal for Americans to travel to Cuba, there's one major caveat that both Bill and Robert brought up, which is the limitation or effectively a prohibition on using hotels. That was a big game changer under the Trump administration. However, as many of you in the travel industry probably have already become involved with, is many travelers are looking for stays in private homes, whether it be via Airbnb or VRBO. Cuba has a very well seasoned stock of private homes in Havana and around Havana that are modern, up to date, that are safe and secure, much not unlike traveling to many other Latin American countries in South or Central America. So these options are more, let's say, conducive to many travelers. What it also provides is your groups, if you have a group, you're going to be mostly dealing with couples or small families, because a lot of these homes may have 2 or 3 bedrooms, and that's the max. Maybe there's a 4-bedroom house just outside of Havana. You can have, let's say, multiple family members traveling, staying in private homes, but it does get more complicated because you're going to have different people staying in different homes in potentially different locations. And it could even be a different quality of home, which can make it a challenge because maybe grandma and grandpa gets the better house and the kids get a different house and so forth and so on. So it does create some complications, but it is a great opportunity to create custom programming for couples and small families. Something that was a little more difficult because of lack of inventory in Cuba, let's say between 2015 and 2017. So there is a small niche of opportunity to do this, and a lot of the tour operators that are currently operating in Cuba can accommodate this for you. Other reasons why you might want to work with a tour operator, in addition to navigating the regulatory environment, is some of the elements on the ground in Cuba have changed. Currency exchange is no longer as simple as it used to be. There's different exchange rates depending on where you exchange your currency. And it's always best to work with your guide that a tour operator has already vetted. And maybe they're even working with an agency in Cuba where they can best advise your clients on how and where to exchange money so they get the best rate possible. That's something that's not always easy for somebody who's just traveling there on their own to figure out. If you go to a state-run exchange place, you may get 22 or 24 Cuban pesos for the dollar. In other places, you could get 100, 110. So the exchange rate can vary quite significantly. They also will advise you, because of supply chain issues and also the way the economy has changed over the last couple of years, on how to make purchases in Cuba to make sure you're getting the best deal and meeting with the best people. It's hard to predict in this political environment, but I would guess, based on history, going back to 2000, that it's possible we might see a rollout and a relaxation of hotels in the near future. It's hard to say with any certainty, that list could be eased. So if you do get involved in the market now, there's really no reason to wait. You can start marketing Cuba. This news blip that came out with the change of regulations has created some PR. There's greater awareness. Cuba is extremely safe. COVID is extremely low. They just lifted mask mandates. So if people are comfortable walking around and traveling around Cuba without a mask, they can do it as well. Flights are regular from Miami at this point. Prices have come down. They're fairly reasonable as compared to where they were last November when flights resumed from the US. The Biden administration's authorized the return of flights from the US to different airports in Cuba. Where that can benefit travelers is instead of having to arrive and depart from Havana, you can arrange a tour that starts maybe in Havana and leaves from Cienfuegos or one of the other airports out in the provinces, which just creates a better travel experience as opposed to having to do a round trip. You can just do a one-way and spend more time in different cities. And again, it's a safe place to travel to, and now's a great time to do it. There's lots of inventory, lots of opportunity. Great guides are available. So whatever happens in the upcoming months or years with regard to regulatory changes, I would recommend getting involved in the market.
Thank you, Tom. One thing that occurs to me that I should say right now, before I forget, is that some hotels, new hotels, have not shown up on any of the lists yet. And whether that's intentional or just bureaucratic inertia on the US side. The Aston Hotel, for example, which is a 5-star hotel on the Malecon, which is heavily invested by an Indonesian company. But its Cuban partner is Gaviota, which means it will probably get on the banned list. But right now it's not, and they are happy to make reservations. And if you make a reservation with them, you're grandfathered. If they get put on the list in a month or 6 months or whenever, you can still use those reservations. I don't know whether those have to be individual reservations. Maybe Bob will have some information about that, or whether it can be an agency that books 10 rooms and those will still be valid. But in any case, that's something we can also talk about in the discussion. I'm going to ask Rena to speak next because she's been added at the last minute because of my not thinking out all the possibilities, and she's in the middle of a family visit. So we'll have Rena and then come to Christopher Baker. Rena is the organizer of the Cuban American Youth Orchestra and has taken musical groups to Cuba, but Americans have learned the Cuban phrase of resolver. The Cubans have to resolver around bureaucracy in their country. We have to resolver around bureaucracy in our country. Rena.
Thanks, John. It's Rena, but in Spanish, if
Rena,
you say
sorry.
Rena, no, it's okay. When I hear Rena, it's not the worst thing in the world, is it? So, CAYO, which originally stands for the Cuban American Youth Orchestra, not a dash between Cuban and American, by the way. We started originally as a cultural exchange program for musicians, young musicians in both countries, to spend time getting to know each other and therefore enhance diplomacy efforts between the two countries. And we did start in the Obama years after my visit there in 2015. And as you just mentioned, John, what was the original plan has been through so many different changes along the way, and we've just been working around whatever comes our way to keep some sort of in-person people-to-people contact alive between not just musicians, but citizens of the U.S. So starting when things got difficult, let's see, in 20 end of 2017 and 2018, we started deciding that we needed to bring people to Cuba because it obviously became very difficult for Cubans to come here. And so we work with Mariesa Sansens of U.S.-Cuba Artists Exchange, who a lot of you may know, to facilitate small group, intimate experiences, cultural exchange experiences for both the students that we take, the teachers that we take, but also people who would like to travel alongside those educational activities. So it's sort of two concurrent tours going on at the same time, I guess. And again, we didn't intend to start out being a tour operator, but we've sort of come to this because we need people to still have contact, U.S. and Cuba, and this is the way we can most easily do it. So we did take a big tour in 2019. We did take a small trip in 2020, and then I've taken two this year. So we've been able to travel quite easily under support for the Cuban people. By now we have many contacts where we're able to do, in-person, individual, meaningful, full-day schedules with a lot of our artist contacts. This most recent trip, we stayed in Casas Particulares, which has been great. But again, in 2019, when we took 35 Americans down to Cuba for a large-scale orchestral performance, we had to stay in a hotel. So right now, we don't know how we can continue. We can come back to that. And of course, we are very much stuck trying to figure out how do we bring Cubans to the United States, because the parity of this exchange is really important. I did, last month when I was there, I did meet with an official from the embassy, and we did chat about everything going on there now, and I understand they're very short-staffed and very behind, and all of you probably know that already, but we're still very much pushing for visas for Cubans to come here. But what I'm seeing is just most Americans think it's illegal. Most Americans think it's too hard. I'm just interested in ways we can all dispel that myth and encourage travel. Again, obviously they're in dire straits and need our tourism dollars. So that's my 2 cents. We plan on going back this fall and again in winter 2023. But really, I'm hoping that we can resume back and forth travel for both parties.
And when you say back and forth, does that mean the Americans you take are musicians who are performing together with Cuban musicians? Are you now able to do that sort of around the edges, or how's that going?
For example, in 2020, right before the pandemic, a couple weeks before, we brought 4 musicians, young musicians from Miami, young adults, and teachers from here, from where I live. And we combined with Cuban musicians and teachers. And we did present a small performance. It was private. And people did attend who had private invitations. And we did all that under support for the Cuban people. So I know things are changing. And it looks like now CAIO, our organization, will be able to take groups under an educational auspice, which is new, which is going to be very exciting. And we are definitely going to take advantage of that. This last trip we had, we took 6 teachers, and we spent time in 2 different arts high schools and taught there, and then met with colleagues and performed just in a private home.
The complication, of course, for public performances on the Cuban side is you also have to go through a bureaucratic procedure to be able to do a public performance. So it's not easy, but it's worth doing. I'm glad you're able to continue. As long as you can stay, please stay. Christopher Baker, the first time I went to Cuba, his book, when it was then the Moon Handbook, was my Bible. I have continued to dip into it in its various editions. It's now a National Geographic production, although apparently there's not been a new edition, and Christopher may explain what the status of that is. But in any case, Christopher has been perhaps, I don't know whether he's a dual citizen, and that allows his ability to have moved back and forth over such time. But he does come originally from England and is now in California. Christopher.
Thanks, John. Regardless of being a US citizen too, or even if I were not, I would be under US law. But I've had the pleasure of 30 years this year of traveling to Cuba. And as you mentioned initially as a guidebook author, having written 5 of the existing guidebooks on Cuba. Moon, National Geographic are 2 different companies, 2 different guidebooks. And since the people-to-people license was affected by Obama, I've principally been making my income as a tour leader for various companies. I led 87 trips for National Geographic expeditions simply to Cuba, but also increasingly arranging tours on behalf of custom groups and leading my own tours, especially, as you probably know, motorcycling is a big passion of mine. And I returned from 8 weeks in Cuba just 5 weeks ago. And one of the 4 custom groups that I led during March and April was actually a motorcycle tour. And this raises, I think, the question of how easy is it to be doing groups? What size limitations are there, given the restrictions that Tom and Bob Muse especially have already discussed in terms of difficulties of operating groups? So Tom had mentioned the excellence of many casas particulares, private B&Bs. And one thing that needs to be mentioned is that there has been, since the input or the influx of American visitors under the Obama administration and the amount of remittances that Cubans in Cuba were receiving, there's been a huge investment in the tourist infrastructure by Cubans, as well as their foreign partners. And this is very important to mention. And that means that these days you can find a significant number of boutique B&Bs with 8, 10, or even more rooms sufficient to put an entire group of, let's say, 10 people in a single B&B. And that's exactly what I did with all 4 groups in March and April. Singular B&Bs, including in Trinidad. Of course, we're limited when you leave Havana, where you may find at this stage about a dozen quality B&Bs that have 10 rooms. You leave Havana and obviously your options are diminished, but nonetheless, there are enough quality B&Bs with 4, 5, 6 or more rooms that you can effectively operate a group, as I am doing in October with a medical group for the UCSF Medical Center of up to 20 people. We'll be using private B&Bs in Havana. The other factor about the support for the Cuban people license that was not mentioned is that this is pre-approved. Anybody who believes themselves qualified to support the Cuban people, and it's you who define how you're going to do that, effectively means putting your money in the hands of private businesses, is pre-approved at any time, be you an individual or operating groups under the support for the Cuban people, pre-approved by OFAC to go to Cuba without requesting any written permission, and you can stay there as long as you wish, as long as you're fulfilling the requirements of meaningful interactions with Cubans and putting essentially money into the hands of Cubans. Let me just follow up your comment regarding the Ashton. I went to see the Ashton the day that it opened, a quality hotel. I'm not happy with the designs of the new hotels going up in Havana, but that's beside the point. I would steer clear of it. I mean, it is a Gaviota hotel, and at this stage, even though it's not yet listed on the OFAC restrictions list, I would steer clear of Gaviota, period. Obviously, until the that restriction list of hotels is rescinded, and we hope it will be by Biden, then entities such as National Geographic Expeditions and larger tour operators are probably not going to return to Cuba. For the reason that Tom mentioned, is that you want all your guests to have exactly the same quality accommodations. With more custom groups like I'm doing with the motorcycle tours, it's less imperative that everybody is in the same quality room. As long as you can, obviously not putting people some in good rooms and some in bad rooms. You obviously have to do your due diligence. And again, as Tom said, there really it means using a quality tour operator with who has a lot of ground experience in Cuba. The golden years for Cubans were the Obama years, obviously, not least. It's not so much to do with the number of US visitors coming in, but also the fact that he removed the limits on remittances. So that family money going into Cuba, $3 or $4 billion a year, was invested in the tourist infrastructure. As I mentioned, a lot of them were investing with foreign partners. And just last month, 6 weeks ago, I went to see a new Casa Particular. Again, a foreign partner invested with a Cuban, putting serious money into turning a private B&B into essentially a boutique hotel. So the good news on the remittances is that Biden has stepped back the Trump restrictions. All we're now waiting for is the means by which that will be facilitated. Obviously, well, Western Union is still banned, but if the Biden administration is serious about facilitating remittances being sent to Cuba, then hopefully we'll see that resolved. And with that, we'll be able to see, hopefully, the Cubans themselves reinvesting in evolving their tourist infrastructure. And the last thing I'll say, because I know I'm going on, is that within Cuba itself, there have been further reforms earlier this year that permit business corporations owned by Cubans as separate entities for the first time, with up to 100 employees. This is a big deal for Cuba, and it potentially projects the facility to have private B&Bs that are essentially boutique hotels, that become boutique hotels, not B&Bs per se. So the trajectory is good for me. I feel very confident where we're at right now. And I was happy to say that when I first arrived in Cuba the first week of March, there was virtually nobody there. It felt a little bit like being back in Cuba during the special period of the early 90s. But within 8 weeks, I had seen a significant influx of tourists. As the pandemic, we put the pandemic hopefully behind us. New flights now operating at better rates than when they came out originally early March, February at ridiculously high rates. I'm feeling very positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Gina Faustin is, as I said, a travel organizer and a producer of shows. And you've seen videos already from the group that she took to Cuba that was, because it was grandfathered, was able to stay in a Cuban hotel. They had already booked the space. So Gina.
Yeah, thank you, John. Hi, everyone. This was probably my 7th trip to Cuba. The first time we went, that was in 1983 for a fencing competition. Then to forever. And when I met John, who was spearheading one of the cruises to Cuba when Obama opened Cuba. So I jumped in and started bringing some groups, and we never looked back until a couple of years ago when everything almost seemed to stop. But just to talk about the last trip we did, it was with my church, Sacred Heart of Cambria Heights. And we had already planned this for like 2-3 years. And so with some trepidation, we moved forward to the trip, and I consulted with John constantly. John, can we go? We just said, yes, your grandfather in, so everything is okay. We used a tour operator that was in New York. We had contact with some other tour operators. So they kept the program pretty much the same as it was with some changes. Because we made the focus more toward religion, connecting with the other churches, Catholic churches in Cuba, as well as actually from past experience with John, going to one of the Santeria, temples and seeing just, a little bit of the different opposite of what they do. So the trip went well. We did connect with the priest you saw in the video, Father Lester Zayed from Sacred Heart in Havana. And one of the things he asked us, actually we asked him, is there anything that you need? He says, just bring toys for the children. So our group was 36 parishioners from Sacred Heart. So actually I told them each passenger could bring maybe 4 toys, 2 for girls and 2 for boys. But being very generous, they each brought between 10 or 20 toys. So we arrived there bearing gifts. When I said bearing gifts, we had quite a lot of toys, between 500 and 700 toys. And we bought some stuff also for the church. What we noticed when we were there, Havana was totally empty. We did a walking tour of old Havana. I think we were pretty much the only ones at that night who walked around. Then we drove around the whole city, looking around and learning. It was quite pleasant, but a little bit sad to see how empty the streets were and not seeing that many people. We did get a chance to go to Trinidad and Cienfuegos, again, trying to connect with the other churches and touring the city. Some of the churches were closed, so we brought some extra toys and gifts and just gave them to local organizations in the area. I have to say, being a group of 36, if it wasn't for accommodation, it would have been very, very difficult or just about impossible. We would have had to cancel the trips had it not been for us being grandfathered. While we were there, I felt sometimes even a little apprehensive, and with the rules changing, like I was saying before, sometimes when some members of my group were it seems like they were enjoying themselves but they were taking pictures, and I would say, stop. You look like you're having, too much fun. Do not post anything with smiles, or we don't want to get into any kind of troubles. That's the kind of feeling I myself, as the tour leader, I was feeling. But eventually, I think everything went well. We felt very safe. Our guide was fantastic. We were very, very generous to everyone we met in Cuba, since we had the support of the Cuban people. So we're hoping to go back in the near future, but only if we can stay in a hotel. So that's where I'm at right now. Or if it's just a group of 2 or 3. At this stage, I really would like to know what constitutes a group. Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 20? Then this way where you stand with the people to people, or the support for the people, the Cuban people. Then you know for sure you're within the guideline, the legal guideline to go back to Cuba. And that's my take. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Gina. To answer that specific question, and Bob can confirm it, but there is no definition of group in people to people. There also is language in this version of the regs which only says that you have to have a representative with the group. It doesn't say an American representative. It doesn't say a paid representative, which means, at least in my interpretation, and what we plan to do, is we will help organize and sponsor any group of people that want to go, that have a serious purpose for doing so. And we will name one of those people as our representative, or we will name as our representative a local Cuban guide who they'll be able to work with and can organize their program very effectively. Speaking of local Cuban guides, Kizzy Camejo, I am trying to get online, and Andrea Holbrook is also trying to get online. She flew to Havana today, so we will hopefully be able to bring them in before we're finished. The next person that I want to invite is Linda Elzer, who has a niche business and a whole parallel charitable effort. Linda, and is a neighbor of mine on Long Island, on the North Shore of Long Island.
Okay, can you bring me in, John? I'm not quite sure what to do.
You're in, just go ahead and speak. You're on.
Okay, great. My name is Linda Elzer. My company is Travel While You Can. I'm an active senior specialist. I have been taking groups to Cuba since 2016. I have a Cuban guide who is a teacher at Camagüey University. He is with me throughout my tour. All of my people stay in casa particulars that are inspected by me and my guide. I live on Long Island. I go to different organizations and speak on Cuba because it is now my passion. I just came back from Cuba last Monday, having been caught in the hurricane that was off of Mexico. At that time, I was doing a mission trip. My company, Travel While You Can, supports a nonprofit that I formed during the COVID problem because nobody was traveling anywhere. And the name of my nonprofit is Hands and Hearts Across the Oceans. We help people locally, but we reach globally. And in the last 6 weeks, I have been to Cuba bringing food, powdered milk for children. I bring medical supplies. I bring baby clothes. I brought 27 pairs of children's shoes. I bring clothing, educational material. This past time, I had 2 50-pound suitcases. And as a result, I sprained one of my knuckles. But anyway, nothing is going to stop me. I normally take 12 people. I have taken as many as 16. We don't stay in hotels, as I said before. Unfortunately, this time, because we have to go in and out of Havana, I will have a tour starting in October that we will go to the western part of Cuba, the Pino del Rio, Soroa, and that's the area where, unfortunately, we will be doing. We do the ballet, and it's an educational, a cultural, and a very affordable way of introducing Americans to Cuba. I was a teacher in another life, and I feel that right now this is my passion and what I plan to do. Anybody would like to have any information, feel free to contact me. John has my information, and I'd be more than happy to help you with any information I can.
Thank you, Linda. Linda's bio isn't yet up on the page. When she sends it to me, it'll be on the page, the blog page, with her contact information. And already we have some websites on, and we'll put whatever people want to have on as far as websites or email contact information. Now, I've got Kizzy. I've muted her because there was some background noise, but I'm going to ask her to unmute. There is Cuba, as I say, resolver is the word. There is a category which is possible to exist in the private sector in travel, which is if you happen to have a casa particular, you can almost function as a cross-the-board travel agent, doing everything for the people that are in your casa. And I don't know, maybe people that walk in the door to visit your casa, but in any case, Kizzy is an example of somebody who has made use of that opportunity to function as an independent tour guide and travel organizer, and hope that the background noise won't be too bad. I can't get her on video right now, but we do have the picture. Kizzy, can you go ahead? Kizzy?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Fine. Yeah, we don't have a video, but we have the still picture. Go ahead.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is a very big pleasure for me to be here, and I've been listening to all of you. Unfortunately, the connection is very bad today here in Havana, not strange for any of you who know so much about Cuba, but I would like to speak about my business and about the experience that I have here. As John was saying, thank you so much, John, for having me, by the way. I started 11 years ago as a tour guide for Cuba Tours, and since 2013, I opened Kizzy Tours, which is my business. I own 3 rental apartments in old Havana, and because I have apartments with my mom and my sister. Can you hear me?
It's going in and out.
John, can you hear me?
Yes, but it's going in and out. So let's just keep trying. And
Hello, John.
Yeah. Kizzy, why don't you try, any rate, keep talking for a while. If it doesn't work, I'm going to suggest you go off and sign back on. And we'll try it again. But go ahead right now and let's see what happens.
John?
Okay, that's obviously not working. All right.
It's going in now. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we heard you. Kizzy? Kizzy, I suggest you sign out.
As I was saying, I own.
We're not getting you enough.
I have.
Sign out and come back in, okay?
Okay.
Right, sign out. And then we'll try again to bring you up. Okay.
All right. Because I think the connection is bad. Let me give.
Okay. Okay.
I'm here.
All right, go ahead. Keep talking.
Okay, so I have the opportunity to have a license, which is called Gestor de Hospedaje in Spanish. It's like accommodation manager. And with this license, I have the possibility of arranging virtually every tour service my clients in my apartments can need. For example, accommodation in other provinces, shows or experiences, all kinds of things. And well, the only thing actually that I'm not allowed to do is to guide for them or to hire a private guide, because in a private guide in Cuba, it's not allowed. So that's what I've been doing with tours. With my business, what I do is I arrange tailor-made trips for tourists. Remember, I've had, and it's been very good. Before the pandemic, I was doing very good with different agencies. Mainly, the main emitting market was Spain and Israel, and the third place was the United States. I was growing in the United States, but then the pandemic struck, and right now I'm just processing whatever comes in. Can you hear me, John?
Yes. And then we just lost you. Okay. The joys. I would note that while there are bandwidth issues in Cuba and technical issues in Cuba, that part of the problem is that the US does not allow Zoom to directly function in Cuba. And so people have to use VPNs as well as find a good connection. So hopefully we'll get Kizzy back. But in the meantime, I want to go to the questions. And there is a question, I don't know if Bob, if this is in your province, and I'd encourage the panelists to look down the questions themselves. And if there's something that you want to pick up and answer. But somebody asks, can I take a group to attend the Cuba Public Health Conference in October under a research license? Bob, you want to answer that?
I don't think Bob's here anymore, but according to what I've read about the research license and also participation in these types of conferences, it would be possible. Again, it would be imperative to work with an organizer. There are many layers that you need to work with. There's a Cuban agency on the side that we'll need to work with. The question remains whether or not, how many passengers you want to send. The hotel prohibition would still apply under that license. So it would depend on that, but probably a little more careful look at the regulations as compared to the conference would be needed.
I wonder too if it would need to be run through MINSAP. I've run into a conflict with that conference with my UCSF medical group because the timing, we didn't realize the conference was going on when we set it up. But because it's medics going on an educational exchange, it is going through MINSAP on visas. That's the Ministry of Public Health in Cuba. They are issuing the visas. It's not through a normal visa process.
That's right.
Yeah, the underlying, what Christopher is saying is that if you are going for an official purpose of any kind, it's not just a tourist card that you need. And that's for performers, and that's for conferences of different kinds. You need to get an authorization. I mean, when I spoke in Holguin, I had to get a special visa. It's it's not always followed, but that's the existing protocol. That if it's more than tourism in the Cuban definition, which you can't do from the American side in any case. But if it's more than tourism, you probably need a special visa. The other, from the US side, my reading of these regs is that this would fit into the conferences, the professional research and conferences category, but it doesn't solve the hotel problem. You'd still have to spread people around casas particulares. But from a US side, it should be totally fine. Professionals going to a professional conference. So that we got out of the new regs. Let's see, other questions.
There were a few on currency, just to touch on that. So the short answer to multiple questions on currency is you can use Cuban pesos, which you cannot get outside of Cuba. The official exchange rate is about 24. I did read something that they're increasing it. The street rate is about 100 to 110 pesos per dollar. Who you exchange it with is one of the reasons why I think it's imperative to travel with somebody like Christopher or a tour operator who can advise on where the best place to do that is. One of the questions is, what benefits the Cuban people? You can use also, it's important to mention, you can also use dollars. Even though dollars are not technically an allowed currency in Cuba, you will be exchanging dollars, which is needed currency for so many Cubans to get hard goods. So your dollars are welcome, and you'll also be spending Cuban pesos. So having both with you at the same time while in country is important. It still goes that in most cases there are limited places where US credit cards, miraculously, I still don't exactly understand how it works, can work, but you will not be able to get access to cash through an ATM machine in Cuba. So as always, as it has been for 20, 30 years, you have to bring sufficient cash with you. But whether you spend US dollars or Cuban pesos with Cubans, both are very welcome, and you're going to be passing your dollars on into the economy once you exchange your dollars for Cuban pesos. So either way.
Yeah.
Tom, a little aside to that. Oh, sorry, Bill, go ahead.
I was going to just ask, is it still advantageous to take euros instead of US dollars, or does that not really apply anymore?
It's the dollars, or you will get better rates with dollars. it just depends. Some people are interested in euros because they have family and friends in the EU, so they're able to exchange these funds more readily. Last time I went in April, I had Cuban pesos, dollars, and euros, but that just becomes, I think, for the regular US traveler, that's an extra layer of complication. I think most travelers would be fine with dollars and then exchanging them into Cuban pesos and keeping some dollars with you.
Let me just add a quick aside to that note about credit cards. Any U.S. traveler to Cuba needs to be aware that the financial institutions are set up to automatically track any potential transaction considered illegal under sanction laws, be it North Korea, Iran, or Cuba. Do not even try and check your bank account from Havana. Seriously, I have had clients whose bank accounts have been frozen because the system it knows by the IPC address that you're coming from Cuba, and it automatically is set up to assume an illegal transaction and blocks it. And that usually means blocking your account associated with it.
Yeah. Just bring cash.
Cash.
Well,
cash is king in Cuba.
But bring your card in case you need medical treatment, because that is one arena in which U.S. credit cards can be used.
Yeah, that's very odd. They have a Canadian place that they charge medical costs to. Any rate, the thing that hasn't been mentioned are the MLC cards, which can be bought from cadencas, bought at the airport.
Don't go there.
The MLC cards are denominated in dollars, but you can't use dollars to get them. You have to use euros or Canadian dollars or yen or whatever, but that's very useful if you want to buy something in a store like the rum or cigars that you're not supposed to bring back anyway, but because they haven't removed that prohibition. Oh, look, we got Kizzy back with video as well. So we're in, at any rate, I just want to say that MLC cards are available and are very useful. It's like a debit card, a prepaid amount that you get, but you can't use dollars to get the dollar-denominated MLC card. I mean, the U.S. is the cause of all of these problems. So, at any rate, Kizzy, do you want to unmute yourself and let's see where we are now? For people, we're going to continue on until about 2:30 with this. Just you're welcome to drop if you need to, but most people are still on and we're going to continue. So if Kizzy unmutes, we will.
I think she's frozen now.
Yeah, now she's frozen. Okay, the joys. At any rate. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead. Your picture's frozen, but we can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, basically what I was saying is that with this license that I got, I get to do all kinds of activities for my clients. It's the only activity that's forbidden in Cuba for clients.
Sorry, we're losing you again. No, this is not going to work.
My clients.
Okay. Never mind. We'll try again at another time and see if we can. Maybe we'll do a program which will just be of.
I'm sorry, the connection is possible.
Yeah.
The connection is possible. If you have any questions, if you want to know something about business and reaction from someone who, if you need any advice, you can contact me, my contacts.
Okay.
I'm sorry, John, I don't even know if you could hear that.
That's okay. We got that. Thank you. So we did learn this category of accommodation manager, which I hadn't known the term for it, but I have seen people there's somebody in Cienfuegos who also has that status. You go into their mini hotel, as it were, with their restaurant and 4 or 5 rooms that they have, and it's like walking into a tour guide's office, a guy or a travel agency office. They have a book with trips all around that part of Cuba that people can go on with them. They can provide the cars. And Kizzy said that she can't provide guides, but somehow guides find ways of working in those situations. Maybe it's somebody is attached to the house in some way, but at any rate, it's a fluid process in Cuba as well as here. Let me see, anybody have responses to other of the questions? On the exchange.
Noting that point on private guide, I see Gay Myers. Oh, Gay, hey, how are you, Gay? Asked a question about, does that apply to US tour operators bringing people to Cuba? Well, whatever the legalities, as John just said, you find a way. The motorcycle tours, the photo tours, I didn't mention my photo tours. The photo tours I use, we always have a Cuban photographer who is the Cuban guide, not necessarily licensed as a guide per se. One of my 3 photo tours that I ran in March, April just passed, the guide was actually from Havana tour because I ran that particular tour through a US Cuba specialist tour company, and they work with Transtour and Havana tour, who supplied an official guide who proved to be fabulous. The other 2 photo tours, we have a private Cuban photographer who specializes in actually 2 different people working as guides, freelance guides for photo groups. So as John said, there is always a way and there is always somebody available, whatever your specialty. Yeah. And by the way, let me just add on the Havana tour guides, even though they are formally state employees as licensed and well-trained guides, they are permitted to freelance and pay a commission to Havana tour if they are booking themselves freelance outside their allotted shifts with Havana tour, and they're allowed to do that through the state system.
Well, that is new information. I hadn't heard that. We should get some details out about that and share it with people. I mean, there are private guides. I was telling someone earlier, and I was in Varadero. It's a whole bunch of private guides who are hired by taxi drivers to take people on day trips from Varadero to Havana, sometimes overnight. Sometimes they run into flack from Cuban authorities, sometimes they don't. The tour guides themselves have been pressing the Ministry of Tourism to become officially recognized as cuentapropistas, but so far the ministry has not accepted that. As I say, in any case, people are doing it. For a travel organizer from the US, I think you have to proceed with delicacy and respect for their situation, but you can find on our list and other sources people who are willing to work with you and just figure out, I mean, obviously the payments will have to be made by the people when they arrive in Cuba. That's not, although now, who knows, there's now donative remittances are permitted. So conceivably payments could go through that donative remittances system. The problem is that while it's there in theory, as it was for Trump, though with a dollar limit, it's not possible in practice because Trump, or very difficult in practice. Trump blocked Western Union because of this phony issue of the banking recipient on the Cuban end. And there is a Canadian provider that seems to have worked out a system that's at a reasonable rate, and that's in our newsletter, or we can provide that information to people. It's one of the things that comes back to the original conversation about, were they doing this all for the optics for the summit, or are they seriously trying to improve the ability of Americans to go and to function in Cuba, in which case what they've announced so far in terms of implementation does not provide us what we need. Let me see if there are any. I wanted to actually come back to what Christopher said. I think people should use the Aston. It's totally legal and legitimate at this point. Gaviota, I mean, I think the US distinction, even the old era distinction between Gaviota and the other companies, wouldn't apply anywhere else in the world. And as long as you're legally clean, you should do it. And it is grandfathered. It's not, it doesn't say that the hotel, but as I say, you have to check the list, continue to check the list, but the Aston and at least one other of the new hotels is not included in the list. So I think that we're in a struggle constantly on our side and with the Cuban side to expand the parameters. And we should not be ashamed of pushing those parameters. Though the other thing that should be said for individuals is that OFAC hasn't gone after anybody since the Bush administration, because they discovered they couldn't really get away with it when people appealed the OFAC efforts to find them. It went into a hearing and all of those cases were thrown out. So OFAC's not gone after individuals. It has gone after corporations. So corporate side needs to be very careful. Individuals organizing their own group trips using support for the Cuban people or people to people. You know, that's, I think that the practicality is you're not going to wind up with it, but don't take that as legal advice. Take that only as political advice, that I think this whole thing is so absurd that the more it becomes ignored in practice, the better. So Bob Schwartz note that I left out the exchange rate for the MLC cards. The exchange rates are the official rates, which means you wouldn't want to do them with dollars anyway. And the euro official rate is not as good as the street official rate. So that's the, that is a limit of doing it, but it does get you the MLC card if you need it. So, okay, somebody's asking about the grandfather. Yeah, no, it's, Allison, I don't have a legal answer and Bob is off right now. So I'm simply giving a lay reading that the new regs include the grandfathering provision, which I was surprised, since it seems there were very few relevant cases, but it's there. And until they include the Aston and the other hotels, I think it's relatively clean, but the main issue is getting the Biden administration to actually be more serious, and whether that's possible, we will see. Anything else, Bill or Chris, that you would like to say? I'm not seeing anything else on the questions list. Oh, someone asked, will there be a recording? Yes, I should have it edited and up onto YouTube by tonight sometime, and everybody will get a notice of the link on YouTube.
I don't think, thanks, John. I don't think I have anything to add. I've actually just spent the last 5 minutes typing up individual answers to the Q&As listed there. A good job all around. Bill, great to see you. Great to hear from you again. one of these days. Most of the folks I generally get to meet bit by bit. I mean, Bob Muse and John, I first met 25, 30 years ago when we used to do the conferences and there were so few of us doing Cuba. But Bill, I hope you and I will meet one day soon.
In Havana, I hope.
Yes. Why not? Why not indeed?
Right. Somebody asked why the freedom to travel bills never come to a vote. It's because they don't have the numbers to win. There was a petition or a sign-on letter from Congress. What they have 120, 100 and something like that signers. That's been the max in this go round. I'm told they've not reintroduced the effort to end all travel restrictions because they can't make the 60 vote. They might be able to make a 50 vote, but they can't make the 60 vote. So like everything else, next November will have a lot to do with what we're living with. And I mean, I harbor this, I don't know whether Bill, you heard anything. There were a number of speeches in which at the summit in which the administration was taken to task for the ideological exclusion of countries. There's this very interesting statement that the vice president made in her opening remark, hoping that this would be in the future more inclusive. Inclusive is the Cuban word. I don't know whether she was trying to send a signal to the other countries there that there is an open debate in the US government about this. I'd like to think so, but I'm prone to seeing a glass half full or 3/4 full when it's only got 10%. But at any rate, if you can pressure through your member of Congress to pressure the State Department, that's great. If you can do it to your senator, if you can write directly through the White House system. The White House has this lovely system. We don't know if anybody but an intern ever looks at them, but at least they keep track of numbers. So if you send a message saying, that's great, President Biden, you can write both to the president and vice president, that's great. We're glad you did what you did, but now let's make it real. And at least maybe somebody will note it in a tally sheet of public concern. So otherwise, we hope that we will have a reason to do another discussion like this because there will be more changes. And we hope to be in touch with you either one-on-one or through this process. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks to everybody.
As always.
Right.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Yep.